So, reflections this evening. I always used to notice when, with Luang Por Chah, that when he'd be requested to give a desana, and then he'd go into the high seat, the tamat, and then he was usually very kind of radiant, kind of charismatic appearance, but when he sat up on the tamat, he just seemed to go empty. And I noticed that, like, just kind of a vacant look, which baffled me because I didn't quite understand at that time what he was doing. But he'd sit, and then from this vacant place would come a desana, or a reflection. And when he asked me to start giving talks in Thai, of course I wasn't that confident in speaking that language at all, but he just said, you've been practicing several years, tell him what you've learned. And then one time I prepared a talk. I thought, he said not to prepare anything, just let it come naturally. So one time I got really interested. I read this book by Lama Govinda, Tibetan mysticism, and I got very inspired by it. And so in one of these all-night sittings at Pudindang, I gave this incredibly intelligent, well-constructed talk, and as soon as I got down from the tamat, he said, "Don't ever do that again." Other kind of character is one, I'm a person that likes to plan things out, and this is how I was educated to prepare and come from some kind of theme or whatever that I think is appropriate, and then speak from that theme. But with Luang Por Chah, he was more interested in speaking from the empty mind, from the here and now. And of course, that is easy enough to say, but how do you do it? Because we always see ourselves in these very fixed terms of personality and our identities with our appearance, with our bodies, and our memories and tendencies and attitudes and so forth. So this of course is the greatest obstruction to understanding Dhamma, is this sakkayaditthi. And sakkayaditthi in the 10 fetters, the sangyojanas in Pali, are the first 3 I have been emphasizing a lot, because I see how important it is to recognize the first 3 fetters, which completely blind us to the path of liberation. As long as our practice is motivated, influenced, and propelled by sakkayaditthi, silabbata paramasa, vicikicca, then we can spend years meditating and going on retreats and going off and living alone and doing all kinds of things. But if we don't break through the illusions of those first 3 fetters, then with all good intentions and determination, we won't see the path, in other words. So then and this is very clearly spelled out in the scriptures. The first 3 fetters are the hindrances or the obstructions to stream entry. And then stream entry is that point where we actually know the path. through direct recognition rather than through views about it or ideas or even thinking about it. It's not a thought, not a concept, not a perception, it's an insight. And so because of this, then I used to sakkayaditthi, take that one because that's the first one, translated like this: the self-view, the ego, the identities we have with our five khandhas and how we see ourselves is programmed into us. So we have these, we're not born with sakkayaditthi. It's not a kind of condition that it just naturally appears at birth. It's instilled in us after we're born. So we get an idea of ourselves in relationship to our mother and father, brothers, sisters, and society, culture. And so that's the conditioning process. Like the vijnana thought is natural. It's not a cultural condition. It's not sakkayaditthi. The human bodies we have, they're natural conditions. They were born according to the laws of nature, and then they grow and get old and die according to the laws of nature. And then the Vedana also is natural to this realm. We live in a sensitive form with, the whole body is a sense organ, plus the eyes, ears, nose, and tongue. And then we also have this ability to, we have a retentive memory. We retain things, we remember. So we can be easily conditioned and influenced by, first of all, our parents or peers when we're growing up and the situation we're born into. And of course the values and sense of self-worth and identity comes from that, from how we're conditioned in those early years to see ourselves in relationship to the world around us from an innocent child's mind. But the sakkayaditthi is instilled in us in the early years, and the silabbata paramasa is like cultural conventions, conditioning, social attitudes, our particular identities that we and information we get just being born in the various ethnic group or national group or racial, the gender, and all these are not necessarily sakkayaditthi, but are instilled in us through that conditioning process. And then vicikicca is the result, is doubt, which means is a result of always attachment to thought. As long as we attach to our thinking process, we're never quite sure. We always end up with doubt as the result. Now these are to be investigated. I mean, you just can't suddenly dismiss them or get rid of them, but they're there. I've found this formula, 10 fetters, very useful because it states something that you can reflect on. How do you create yourself as a person? How do you create sakkayaditthi? If it's not coming from outside, it's not devadas or influences from outside, it's not anything, but it's how we, very thoughts we have, the language, the memories, the identities, the sense of me and mine. I am, you are. It goes into all the personal pronouns and the identity, the sense of mine. This is my sankati. This is my jivan. And of course, on a conventional level, fair enough. But this sense of me and mine and I am, and then you and we, and they. All these come from a conditioning process. And whatever your native language is, you that's the one that you're conditioned by in the early years. So thinking, when you think, we have to use language. So we cling to thoughts and memories, values, principles, attitudes, conventions, as well as emotional memories, fear, hatred, delusion, jealousy. We identify with all these. We identify with our sexual drive. We identify with our moods and feelings. In other words, this identity is like a clinging to these conventions, to these conditions. And it's done out of ignorance. It's not that we do it, with full knowledge and wisdom. It's out of ignorance that we become conditioned and blinded and limited by the very conditions that we are attached to and identify with. So just contemplate, reflect on the power of your language, or just the pronoun I am. I used to contemplate that in my mind. It's like it's a fair enough statement because it's a statement of presence. It's not, when I just think the personal pronoun I am, I'm announcing a state of being present, but it's still not a person yet, is it? It's just a statement of presence. And then I add the personal bits. I am Ajahn Sumedho, I am American, I am a bhikkhu, and on like that. And I'm a good bhikkhu, I'm not a very good bhikkhu, I'm senior bhikkhu, or whatever. And the whole thing, then you form this sense of yourself. But this I am is also a conditioning that we acquire. And then my thoughts, my views, my opinions, my life, my rights, what I think, this is mine, it belongs to me. And so we create a whole world around this illusion of a separate self and this identity with I am, me and mine. Now, I'm not expecting you to believe this, but what encouragement here is to investigate, because it's something you can actually investigate in consciousness. Like at this moment, all you have to do is think I am, and that's, there's an awareness of this in deliberate thinking, these two words. So I am is not a kind of fixed position or a permanent state. It's merely a convention of language that can be observed. But attachment to thought always takes us into I am Ajahn Sumedho, and I'm good, bad, right, wrong, and on like that. And then I create a whole sense of myself according to values of good and bad, right and wrong, according to memories, according to ideas of what should be, according to memories of maybe things I've done that I shouldn't have done, things I've done in the past that I feel guilty about. The whole sense of a self arises from this attachment to the thinking process. So then, to stop thinking, we're usually so conditioned to think. We're called manusya, or creatures that think. We have, and it can be a curse, and it's also a blessing. It's how to use our thinking abilities through wisdom that the Buddha, his teachings are about learning to think in the right way, learning to use thought in a skillful way, rather than just be conditioned to think like a Buddhist or think like the scriptures or think according to a conditioning process that comes out of avijja or ignorance. So this word avijja is very important because it means not knowing Dhamma, not recognizing reality. It's not about not being able to read and write or ignorance of all kinds of things, but this avijja means not being awake and operating from a program that you acquired, and not being able to see what you're doing, what you're grasping. So then, of course, that leads to suffering, and that's what we experience in our lives, is suffering. So, because we are obsessed thinkers, then we tend to try to think ourselves through the Dhamma, and how to think about Nibbana, or think about anatta, or think about the path, or think about, the Dhamma as something we've got to define, something we've got to identify through perception. So the Buddha, recognizing the dilemmas that human beings have, used the actual reality of suffering as a noble truth, because it's something easily seen. It's not esoteric or arcane or remote or special. I mean, we all suffer in all kinds of ways because of this ignorance. This ignorance is the cause of all suffering. So in Paticca Samuppada, it starts out with avijja, vajjaya, sankhara, and then it all ends up with sokha paritewa, dukkha tomananupaya, grief, sorrow, despair, and anguish. So if every thought, every movement, everything you do starts with avijja, the result is always going to be dukkha, is the result of avijja influences avijja, vajjaya, sankhara. In other words, this avijja influences your thoughts and how you see yourself, your memories. Sankhara, vajjaya, vijnana, consciousness, vijnana, nama, rupa, salayatana, phassa, vedana, and so forth, down to sokha paritewa, and it's the grief, sorrow, despair, and anguish, or suffering. So the aim is to awaken to Dhamma, and so we're not operating from avijja anymore. We can still operate from avijja even though we're Buddhist monks, so we're always trying to become things, trying to get things we don't have, trying to get rid of things we have that we don't want, and so our attempts, eager attempts to practice, can be motivated by avijja, and of course that's always going to end up in some kind of grief or despair or disappointment. So the important, this is how I see it, is to get through this, to not operate from avijja, but from the present moment, from the from consciousness that is no longer limited by ignorance and attachment to sankharas or conditions. And of course that is sati, sampajanya, satipanya. So this, and my own insights into this is that this is the only possible escape hatch we have in this realm, is through sati, sampajanya. There's no other way. You can't get it through refining consciousness, through the conditions, through the jhanas, through refining conditioned phenomena. As long as there's conditioned phenomena and you still cling to it out of ignorance, no matter how beautiful or refined it might be, you still have the basic problem is the avijja, not understanding, not seeing Dhamma. So in this Thai forest tradition, the mantra Putto is, I found, very helpful because it's the Buddha's name, and it can be used to tranquilize the mind. It's a good practice of samatha to just stop the wandering mind through thinking, through just internalizing Putto as a word, just to stop the wandering in thought, the proliferating thought tendencies and habits that we have. Like Luang Por Chah, when he told me in the beginning, he said, if you're going to think Putto. He said, don't think about anything else. And of course, I'm a person that likes to think and would like to figure everything out with thought. But with all the best attempts, still, even if you figure it all out with thought, you still suffer because the avijja is still there. So it's a kind of imminent reality of awakened attention in the present. It's merely the ability we have to pay attention, to be attentive, to be awake, to be open, receptive in the present. So, at this present moment when we're sitting here, then we have, we can focus on an object, like samatha meditations are always focusing on an object. We limit ourselves to one object and focus on that, and that's like fixing your attention on a point, concentrating on one point, an object, in order to shut out everything else. So it's a kind of samatha practice, concentration practice, and you have to ignore, dismiss, repress everything else in order to just absorb and concentrate on the one point. Then there's sati sampajanya, which is kind of this broad, open perspective in the present moment. So I use these words like the point that excludes and the point that includes, because a point doesn't necessarily have to be a dot. It can be the whole thing at this moment. The point that includes means that we're allowing everything to be what it is like in the present. It is the way it is. That includes the village noises, the gunshots, the music, the heat, all the monks, and everything else. Everything at this moment belongs here because it's here. So this is the point of including, and so this is for reflection. Do we have to exclude the world in order to escape it, or is the real path not excluding the world but inclusive? So this is like a conundrum. I know from my own experiments that practicing in order to get rid of the world, to suppress it, to control my conscious experience on one point has, it has certain advantages, but it's not an escape hatch. It's just a temporary state that, you can't sustain for that long. But the point that includes then is always, including everything, wherever you are, whatever state your mind, your body is in, and the conditions you find yourself in. So this is the kind of vipassana style of samadhi, where it's an inclusive, samma vayamo, samma sati, samma samadhi. Now I used to, because I figured this out before I actually could do it, I used to practice a lot, just trying to open up to the present moment. And so I'd use things like just be here and now, and say things like the way it is. But also it's a kind of relaxed state. It's not a rigid, intense, forced sense of concentration. In order to include everything at this moment, it's a kind of relaxed attention. It's not a dull kind of, you just include everything and fall asleep, but you're attentive, but you're not forcing the mind to concentrate on one object. So everything that's happening in this moment that we're experiencing, belongs here. And I found this very helpful, living in situations where you have very little control over the conditions around you. If you're living in Bangkok or London or places like that, how can you demand, the London shut up and be quiet so I can do my samatha practice? Or even in the forests in Thailand, or even in England, there's always something to disrupt or annoy or irritate. Unless you get, a sensory deprivation tank or a completely black, dark cave. But then you're making conditions for your practice. You have to have special conditions that control, so you are not irritated by any harsh external impingement. But even in a dark cave, where there's nothing, no sound coming in and no light, your mind goes on. Your consciousness, and I found the first 3 months of my meditation in Nongkai when I was a Samanera was, I was all alone in a kuti. I didn't talk to anyone. I bring the food, but I was, I tried to practice samatha meditation, trying to control consciousness. But when you're all alone 24 hours a day, and with yourself and nothing to do, but just try to repress everything, you can only do that so long, and then you can't do it anymore. So it's a matter of opening up to the present conditions as they happen to arise. Well, I found that I was 30 years old, 31 years old, and I'm from a social background that was very repressive. So they were never allowed to show anger and things. So you learn how to suppress. I was clever enough to where I learned how to suppress feelings, because that was what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to show anger towards your mother or father, or you're supposed to, you have these ideas of what good boys should be and respecting their parents. And in order to perform that role, then a lot of things had to be reduced and repressed. And these started coming up in those first 3 months. Anger, resentment, states of mind that I had never really recognized before. I used to have this opinion before I ordained that I was a fairly nice guy, really, kind of, good-natured, kind of person. And then being alone with myself, I found some of the thoughts, emotions that arose were shocking to me, because I thought that old image of myself as being a good guy, it's not true. Only a bad guy could be thinking like this. But somehow or other, the situation and the trust in Dhamma, I already had a lot of faith in Dhamma, so I stayed with it. And eventually, these kind of dark things manifested, came up, and then I just let them go. I couldn't control them, I didn't suppress them. It's like a purifying experience. Rather than driving me crazy and making me, disrobe, actually it was like purifying, like a mental enema. What comes out is rather disgusting, but it's also purifying the mind. And then after 3 months, I woke up one morning and the mind was absolutely luminous. There was no, I couldn't, all these dark things were gone. So I was in a state of like sopanajita, a kind of state of consciousness that was luminous and beautiful. But avijja was still there, so I immediately thought, I'm enlightened. 3 months, I'm enlightened. and that's avijja. And I'm going to find out later that I wasn't. But it was a unique experience, because I never had that experience before, where your mind, your consciousness is still operating, you're alert, you're not in a trance, but there's no sense of a self. It's very light and buoyant feeling. Everything was touched by luminosity. So I was in this kuti, it was a pretty rough kind of kuti, anything but beautiful. But it looked beautiful with this mind like this. Everything was beautiful. The hongnam, the toilet, was beautiful. And then I realized it's the mind that's beautiful. It's that purity of consciousness is beautiful. It has luminosity, it's radiant. But avijja, when that is the cause, when we start with avijja, then we don't know that. We always, avijja bhajya sankhara, sankhara bhajya vijnana. So then our consciousness is always is being affected and conditioned by avijja. So anyway, the encouragement is to investigate these 3 fetters, not from a personal perspective, like I'm investigating 3 fetters, but deliberately create yourself, but listen to it, like if you're just trying to suppress self-views and sakkayaditthi, it doesn't work. It's another kind of sakkayaditthi. It just becomes more confused and complicated. So the self needs to be recognized, and this was my insight, was that to create sakkayaditthi I have to think, and I have to attach to these thoughts. Believe in what I'm thinking. Believe the thoughts I have. Unquestionably operate from sakkayaditthi or avijja. And then that always ends up as never being quite sure where I am, what I've done, if I'm right or wrong, whether I'm getting anywhere or not, or if I'm doing it right, or so there's always this sense of doubt as a result of avijja, which is another form of dukkha, for suffering. Because in this kind of doubting state that's caused through avijja, through grasping our thinking process, our views and opinions. Test it out, just see, notice also that just I am, it's, before you even think the word I, you just notice when you're determined to think, I just say these two words. Before you think I, there's a kind of empty space, a pause, isn't it? And you kind of note that empty pre-state before you intentionally think I is like this. And so you're beginning to notice before you think I, the space before that word, and then think I, and then there's another gap. So I used to practice really noting these gaps between words. Or I did a lot of meditation on space, visual space. Because when I was at Wat Pah Pong years ago, I started forming views and opinions about different monks. So, as I got to know the monks, and I had my own views about this is a good monk, this isn't such a good monk. Then I thought, that I sit with these monks every day, every morning, every evening, in the morning, evening chanting, and I still see them in terms of sakkayaditthi, personalities, and my own particular judgments of them. So I started just practicing awareness around the space between monks. I wouldn't pay attention to the individual monks, this monk or that monk, but the space between. It's there, you just have to look. And just changing from this habitual sense of me making value judgments about others and liking or disliking others, and creating these, I'm creating personalities in my mind about these monks. So the space is pretty much, between one monk and the next has nothing but space. It has no quality to it. It's not Ajahn this or whatever, it's not a bhikkhu, it's not a samanera. So it just beginning to notice. So you're consciously determining gaps and spaces. This works on the visual level, but then on a mental level, with the thinking process, this recognition of the before gap, before I, and then there's a gap, and then am, and then there's a space. But then we tend to fill it up. I am Ajahn Sumedho, I've done this, I've done that. And we go on in proliferating about my history, all the things I've done or haven't done, my views and opinions. And that's creation out of ignorance. That Ajahn Sumedho is that proliferating habit is created by avijja. And it always ends up as dukkha. Now the other part of paticca samuppada is what? Patiloma is the nirodha side. So these apply to the second and third noble truths. In order to investigate the second noble truth, it's the anuloma, where you start with avijja, bhajja, sankhara. And then it ends up with sokkapayite vitukkha tomanadupayana. And then the nirodha side is where the avijja's gone. So everything ceases when there's no avijja, the whole thing collapses. And that's nirodha. And that's observable. I mean, it's recognizable, nirodha. So you don't kind of drop dead or, go unconscious. But there's still consciousness operating, there's mindfulness, but there's also discernment of non-attachment, avijja. Not avijja means ignorance, vijja means knowing, knowledge, insight. So these, I found all these teachings so helpful because they're really brilliant. They got Four Noble Truths, Paticca Samuppada. You've got the 10 fetters, the 4 stages. Like stream entry is that insight where there is that moment where there's no sakkayaditthi, silabbata paramasa, vicikicca, there's no avijja. So it's you recognize the path. And all the personal you don't create, when the following ones, like sakkayaditthi, anakami, arahant, these are, like sakkayaditthi, you still have lust and anger or aversion. But these are natural conditions. These are not, the sexual desire and anger are primal kind of, they come with the package. They're not about culture or personality anymore or language. They're energies, survival mechanisms. They're for like sexual desires for procreating the species, and anger and fear are kind of primal survival mechanisms that all animals have. So then, but with sakkayaditthi, silabbata paramasa, vicikicca, we make these very personal all the time. My sexual desires, my anger, my fears, everything becomes personalized, and then it's avijja, and then it always leads to suffering. So the important issue is to see through these human created conditions. Not to just get rid of them, but to understand. So you're no longer coming from avijja. You can still think I am, and use language and operate from social conventions and so forth. But the difference lies that there's vijja rather than avijja. So Ajahn Chah was always emphasizing samut satcha, paramatta satcha. Samut satcha is the conventional realities that we have to use, in society and in the world we live in. And then paramatta satcha is ultimate reality. Now the great thing is that we can actually recognize ultimate reality. These human individuals. It's not kind of beyond our abilities, but it's clearly stated, clearly spelled out in these Pali teachings, in the suttas. They couldn't, after 46 pansas, I'm still absolutely, totally impressed with the Buddha's wisdom, because these teachings are incredibly practical. They're not just high-minded, idealized, philosophies. Or they're not, based on something that is so remote, so refined that we could never possibly do it. It's based on just the reality of here and now and human suffering, and how to use that suffering in order to be free from attachment to it. And this realm that we actually live in is a realm of suffering. It's about death. We're all going to die, and we all have to lose our loved ones. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. Many people don't like that reflection. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will be mine forever and ever, and will never be separated from me, is, I think, the Western mindset. Make me live forever, and all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will be mine forever. But this is a reflective teaching, isn't it? All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise. It's just pointing at the reality of change and this realm, so that we awaken to the way things are, not try to create an illusory heavenly realm that can only end up in suffering anyway, because it will be terribly disappointed, because reality is not like that. It's not heaven. It's like this. And this reality then isn't just the sankharas changing, but it includes the awareness of change, the deathless, or the amatta Dhamma. So our refuge then is in amatta Dhamma, or deathless reality, rather than in just kind of a resignation to old age, sickness, and death in some kind of negative way. So anyway, I'll stop here. I'll get going. I get very enthusiastic about this. That's the only thing that I find interesting in these days, because it is, but you can prove it. It's not just high-minded thinking, or living in a cloud nine. It deals with the realities of my own aging body and experience that I'm involved in. And then, like in the West, people have very strong opinions about everything. And so, we're supposed to have opinions about things we may know nothing about. At least my generation was. Remember in university, I felt I had to have opinion about everything, even though I didn't know most of the things they were talking about, but I could have an opinion. So that's a very strong sense of self, having to have a point of view, having to be right. Always feeling I might be wrong, always having to be right. My view is the right, my attitude is the right attitude, my way is the right way. So this is, can be put in this category of sakkayaditthi. And then it's not to be despised, but to be recognized. It's listening to now, like in the West, they have such high-minded ideas. They attach to very high concepts. So it's like freedom, democracy, equality. All these things are very inspiring as ideals. How things should be. We should all love each other and be kind, and we should all support each other in the Dhamma, and we should never hurt or harm or hate or insult each other. We should always have metta for all creatures, and we should. And these are very high-minded ideals. But the way it is, it's not about becoming high-minded, but awaken to the reality of being, that having the karma that you have, the way your mind works, your body, your feelings, your emotions, are like this. It's not justifying or anything, it's really recognizing sankharas as impermanent. And we all have to learn from the way we are. You can't learn I can't be Ajahn Chah or Lumpur Liam or anything like that. I've got to learn from this thing here. It's not that I always, I'm very self-critical as a sakkayaditthi personality. So I'd like to have, been more like Lumpur Cha actually. But that wasn't the karma I had to live with. I was like this, in whatever forms that takes. But this awareness, this is the escape hatch. So in the Dhammana Sutta, there is the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. Therefore, there is an escape from the born, the created, the formed, the conditioned. It says so in the Dhammana Sutta. There's an escape from the created, the formed, the born, the conditioned, because there is the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. You can't conceive, like these words, unborn, uncreated, you can't conceive anything, can you? My mind goes blank. Try to conceive unborn, uncreated with your thinking mind. All you can do is negate created, all you can say is uncreated. But you can't form a picture, an image, it has no color. So it's not about conditioned phenomena. Conditioned phenomena always has shape, form, size, texture, color, has some form of shape, has some quality like smell, taste, or touch. But unborn, uncreated, and that's like a koan. It stops the thinking mind. You can't think anymore. Like Lumpur Cha used to say, trying to think about anatta, your head will explode. Trying to analyze and figure out anatta, no self. Because the thinking mind is born out of avijja, and it depends on a sense of me and mine, and form, and being blinded by the form, being identified with form, nama rupa, salayatana, pasavedana, dhanna, upatan, and then it goes into jati, jaramarana, sokapariteva, tukatomana upayan. This is like learning to really test your mind out. The created, there is the born, the created, the born, the form, the conditioned. You can create anything with that. You can create any, like abstract forms, or you can make definite forms of microphones and men and women and so forth. They all have their defined forms. You can make fantasy forms, colors, mixed colors, and create textures, and do all kinds of things with the four elements, earth, fire, water, and air. With the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned, the thinking mind stops. And to know that when there's no thought is like this, you can recognize. And it's like gamnot rule in the Thai term, to really notice this. Because it happens all the time, but we never notice it. Because we're always going from one thing to the next. So this mindfulness then allows us to notice the gaps in space between monks. Notice the space between this row and the next row. It's just, it doesn't sound like much, but you're actually informing consciousness with this kind of knowledge, space is here and now. It doesn't have any quality other than being spacious. And it doesn't have any personality. It doesn't belong. It's not mine or yours. And then in consciousness is one of the unlimited things. So it when you're conscious, then you, with sati and sampajanya, you can actually observe form arise and cease, conditions arise and cease. And then you notice the presence and the absence of conditions in consciousness. This is an example of I am. Sounds too simple, doesn't it? But you've got to start out from something kind of basic. So I create I and am, and between those two words is a space, and before and after. And so you're actually informing. If you do this, then your mindfulness will connect. It's not rather than just kind of sporadic flashes of insight. Your mindfulness can sustain itself because it's natural. Mindfulness is not created. We don't create mindfulness. I can't make myself be mindful as a person, but I can be mindful through letting go of conditions and investigating yoniso manasikara. So I offer this as a reflection.